Good evening. It's always an honor and a pleasure to see all of you this evening. We continue our Sagan Colloquium on global health challenges, and tonight we have two key speakers who are going to share a little bit about their work. Before they come on the podium, I would like to introduce Joan Bo. She has been the Director of Nursing at Delaware Health for almost 25 years. And she actually been one of the key architects in terms of helping me put some of the names together. So without any further ado, I'll call on John to introduce our speakers for tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Quay. That was very nice. First, I'd like to tell you a bit about the speakers. Adam Howard is a program manager for the Environmental Health Division at the Delaware General Health District, which is your health department. He has 12 years of public health experience. He received his BS in education from Ohio State University and will be receiving his master's in public health in December from the University of Florida. He is a registered sanitarian in the state of Ohio and a registered environmental health specialist through the National Environmental Health Association. Mr. Howard manages, among other things, the Vector Control Program at the Health Department. Dr. Heather Elaine received her BA in Biochemistry from Hiram College and her Doctorate of Veterinary Medicine and her MPH and VPH, which is Veterinary Public Health, from Ohio State University. She is board certified by the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine, and she has just completed her service as a board member for the Franklin County Department of Public Health. Dr. Lane is an epidemiologist at our disease prevention unit, working for all of you to prevent further spread of disease at the health department. Dr. Lane, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Joan. I have one comment. It is the Ohio State University. My husband's in the audience, so I had to say that. He would be very upset if I didn't. All right. Good evening, everybody. How is everyone tonight? Did I hear an eh? Hopefully we can change that. Okay. Let me just get this up and running. Okay. I have to stay at the podium, so I'm going to work really hard to do that. A prairie dog and a Gambian rat are hanging out in a warehouse. Is this the beginning of a terrible joke, or is this the beginning of an outbreak that sent public health officials into a panic? Think about that for just a second. As Joan said, my name is Dr. Heather Lane, and my colleague Adam Howard is here this evening, and we're really excited to talk to you guys about a topic known as global health and the One Health Initiative. And for this talk, we're going to focus primarily on how animals impact our health. Is this microphone okay for everybody? I hear a little bit of a lisp in it. Okay, great. Oh, and I wanted to mention in this slide as well, we do want to have some audience participation. We will compensate you for this, so please participate in this talk. All right, back to our rat and our prairie dog friends. Anybody in this audience knows I'm not very funny. I wouldn't be standing up here putting together a joke for you. So if you picked the second, yes, this was the beginning of an outbreak that did send public health officials into quite a bit of a panic, and I'm going to tell you why. To do that, I need to give you guys some background. This outbreak occurred in 2003, but just 2 short years earlier, we had the terrorist attacks, the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Not everyone in this room maybe remembers those, but you, I know, have at least heard of them. And because of these attacks, there was also a great fear that the terrorists were going to weaponize biological agents and use them in attack against the United States. There was actually a real-life example that happened that you might have heard of with the anthrax letters. An individual was sending anthrax in letters to media and public officials as well. And anthrax, just like the next disease I have here on the side, smallpox, are considered class or category A bioterrorism agents, which means they're the worst. There's 3 categories, A, B, and C, and they're both in A. And smallpox is particularly concerning because it's the only eradicated human infectious disease. And because of that, we stopped vaccination in 1972. So if there was an attack using smallpox, a large percentage of the population would not be vaccinated and therefore would be at great risk. Fast forward to 2003, when some individuals started popping up with these lesions on their hands. Now I have a side-by-side. That's a little bit of a graphic picture, but the one on your left is a smallpox patient. The one on the right are the cases that they were seeing in 2003. So obviously there's some difference in the severity, but I'm sure you can appreciate a lot of the similarities. So at this point, public health was pretty panicked. Could this be a terrorist attack? Who's been infected? How did this happen? But fortunately, they ran some diagnostics and they were able to find out that this was a disease called monkeypox. And monkeypox is a close relative to smallpox. It's the same genus as smallpox, and it was originally discovered in research monkeys in the 1950s, hence its name. Now, the first human cases were only started to be seen in 1970, and it's only been found in Central and Western Africa. So this outbreak that occurred in the United States was the first time it's ever been seen off the continent of Africa. So that's pretty impressive. And I guess for me, that leaves the question, how did this happen? How did a disease that's been only in Africa end up in the United States? And I'm going to explain to you some of the reasons why this occurred. So in April of 2003, there was a shipment of African rodents. And with this shipment were these Gambian rats that I was talking about on the early on slides. Once these rodents came into the United States, they went to an animal vendor facility, and they were then housed by several prairie dogs. I don't have specific pictures from that day or that animal facility, but in a lot of these cases, you can see the picture on the bottom right there. Animals are normally in pretty close contact. They can often touch each other. Really dense holding for these animals there. And so with this dense holding and the travel, this causes a few things to happen in animals. One, they're stressed. It's a new environment. And I'm sure everybody in this room has heard that stress can really knock down your immune system. So they're stressed and decreasing their immune system. They also usually have poor nutrition. Again, that's knocking down their immune system. In addition, these prairie dogs have never probably been exposed to an African rodent, so they're naive to whatever that rodent might be carrying. And it just set up the perfect situation for these prairie dogs to pick up the smallpox from these African rodents and then spread it to the households and veterinarians that they went to. So they ended up in several different states, and I don't have any documentation of this, but I've been told that one of these prairie dogs was given as a Mother's Day gift, which I think is really funny. Is, hey mom, here's a prairie dog, if that's not odd enough. It also has monkeypox, so happy Mother's Day. Okay, so many of the people that had close contact with these animals became infected, so the owners, veterinarians, other caretakers, and by the time this outbreak was over, they had 47 confirmed and probable cases. You can see the list of states, it's all across the country, and there was even a case in Ohio. The control measures that were put in place for this was that anyone that was at risk was given a smallpox vaccine with the hope that there was some cross protection there. And then it took many, many local, state, and federal public health officials to control this outbreak, investigate where it came from, and put in some mitigation steps. And one of those was that African rodents are no longer allowed to be shipped to the United States, which is obviously a great thing because we don't want monkeypox here. However, I'm going to just point out a few fun facts about these rats that you might not know of. So for one, they can sniff out tuberculosis. In other countries, they're trained to do this, which is really fascinating. So they're very smart, very good noses as well. And they can also sniff out landmines. So something you probably didn't know about these rodents, but I think it's pretty cool. So the moral of this story is that a disease from the heart of Africa could end up in the United States or anywhere else in the world and basically be undetected until people start showing these lesions. And this is really why a global One Health approach is essential. So what is One Health? Has anybody heard of One Health before? Okay, I'm seeing some nods, I'm seeing some no's. So One Health is this effort to obtain optimal health for humans, animals, and the environment. And the reason for this is that they're all interconnected. If the health of one suffers, the health of the others will also suffer. Can anyone think of some examples of when this happens? How are animals' health impacted by humans or vice versa, or the environment? You can just yell it out if you have one, sure.
Humans are constantly reintroducing species to new areas of the world, which can use invasive species or like spread.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened in the monkeypox case. Great. Anybody else? Okay, go for it.
And like anthrax can be transmitted from tail to human.
Yep, that is absolutely true. I won't be asking that question later on. You get it right. Excellent. All right, thanks, guys. So who's involved in One Health? I'm not going to read through this whole list, but obviously there's a lot of different fields that get involved with One Health. Human medicine, veterinary medicine, medical researchers, environmentalists are all very active in the One Health effort. I'm not going to touch a lot on the history, but I'll just give you guys a few key facts of the past. So in the 1800s, there was this human physician named Rudolf Virchow, and he noticed this interconnection between human and animal health. But really, after that, until more recent years, nothing was done with it. Veterinary medicine worked in their own field, human medicine worked in their own field, and they didn't really talk to each other. Until about the 1980s, when a few individuals, including Charles Schwab, who's a veterinarian, and an epidemiologist, started calling for this more unified approach, that the health of the animals, the people, and the environment is very interrelated. And there's a little bit of debate about this, but he's basically given credit for coining the term one medicine or one health. So since that time, there's been a pretty big push to focus on this One Health initiative, and many organizations, professional organizations, have had their own statements on it. There have been several organizations that have been developed to promote One Health. It's become a big deal. And I'll argue that it's a bigger deal now than it ever was before for several reasons. I touched on some of them, but I'm going to highlight a few others as we go. For one, the human population is increasing. By the year 2050, we're expected to be over 9 billion people. People take up resources. These people are going to need places to live. They're going to need food. There's also going to be higher density, which doesn't help with the spread of disease. Here's some pictures of the Amazon basin. These are aerial pictures. The one on the left is before deforestation started, and you can see how that goes to the one on the right. And a lot of times in these countries, taking down trees is quite a task. So it's not something you go out into the field for a day and then you come back and you hang out with your family. A lot of times they move their whole families there and they live in the woods, working these lines here to cut down the trees along the way. And they're doing it to make a living. But you can imagine that picture on the left, whatever animals are living there maybe have never been exposed to human beings before. But on that picture on the right, you can see how some of those animals are probably much more likely to be exposed to those humans. Therefore, whatever pathogens those animals are carrying can also be exposed to those people. Those people can also be exposed to those pathogens. Another thing that's concerning is our changing vector ranges. When I say vectors, I mean some of the insects that carry our diseases, like our ticks and our mosquitoes. This doesn't show a difference in vector range, but this is actually the new planting zone map for Ohio, and you can see how it moved up to a warmer planting zone. Obviously, our mosquitoes and our ticks, they enjoy the warmer weather. Their life cycles can last longer. They can stick around for longer in the season. This is concerning because a lot of these vectors are moving further north, and they're also bringing with them the diseases that maybe we haven't seen here before. I'm going to have to skip out to a YouTube video here. Hopefully it'll play. But my next slide is based on travel. And we maybe won't play the whole thing, but this video shows all the flights across the world in a 24-hour period. So every yellow dot is a flight. And while you're watching this, just think about everything that is moving from country to country. So there's obviously people, commodities, and every one of these flights could also have a disease on one of those planes as well. So just watch that for just a few seconds, and you can see all the different flight patterns across the world there. And just envision how many diseases might be coming from other continents and ending up in the United States or anywhere else. Okay, so basically these changes in the environment and the human-animal interface that never occurred before are now occurring at record pace. So much so that Hollywood has even gotten on board. Has anybody seen the movie Contagion? Okay, I have one individual who's seen it. I'm guessing this will be a really hard question then, but does anybody know what virus this movie was based off of? Takers? Okay. Anyone heard of Nipah virus? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the story of Nipah. So back in 1999, some pig farmers started becoming ill in Singapore and Malaysia. And by the time that this outbreak was over, they had over 250 illnesses and over 105 deaths. So it was pretty powerful and pretty scary for the people that lived there. And to talk about this illness, I think it's best to talk about the epidemiologic triad, which is basically this interplay between the host, the agent, and the environment. And really what you need is a susceptible host that can get infected by an agent. So in this case, that would be Nipah virus. And those two need to come together in the right environment in order for them to spread disease. So for Nipah virus, there was an infected host that was bats, and it gave the Nipah virus to the pigs, and then the pigs gave the Nipah virus to the people. And the reason why the bats ever came in contact with these pigs, and the reason why this was the first time this virus was ever seen, was because there was a drought, so the bats had lost their food, and there was also intentional burning of the forest so that they could clear it out for farmland, which pushed these bats into the area of these pigs and these pig farmers, which allowed for the appropriate environment for this disease to spread. So because of this outbreak, Malaysia used to have 2.4 million pigs. They had to euthanize the pigs in order to control the disease. It dropped down to 1.3 million. And pig farming was a big deal in Malaysia. With this, pork consumption dropped 80% because the people were fearful to eat pork because people were getting sick from the pigs, obviously. And now these pig farmers can only farm in certain regions in Malaysia. So not everybody that was a pig farmer before can still be a pig farmer now. I'm not going to read the specifics on this slide, but just look at some of the numbers of what this cost to control and to pay back for those pigs that were euthanized, and also the losses in tax revenue. It also crushed the domestic and export markets, and multiple homes and schools and shops had to be closed during this outbreak until they figured out what was going on. And I think this is really incredible. 36,000 people suffered from loss of employment due to this. And I brought this up because everybody thinks about, oh my gosh, this many people got sick and this many people died, which is very important, but there's also huge economic and social impacts that come with these outbreaks as well. I'm sure everybody's heard of Zika and Ebola, which is why I'm not going to touch on them specifically, but these diseases came about through very similar manners, that the epidemiologic triad was such that the host, agent, and environment were brought together and disease could successfully spread. So some of these diseases that I've talked about are what are considered zoonotic diseases. Anybody heard of zoonotic diseases before? Great. Plural is zoonoses there. And basically a zoonotic disease is any disease or infection that can be transmitted from a non-vertebrate animal to a human under natural conditions. So for our Nipah virus, you can see I have our pig there. That's our vertebrate animal reservoir. Nipah virus is obviously the infectious agent, and then it can spread to the susceptible human. Now you can have reverse zoonoses, which go the other way, so human to animal. An example of this is MRSA. I'm sure everybody's heard of MRSA, but that's oftentimes a reverse zoonoses. In addition, vectors can also get to be a part of this, in which they carry the agent in between the animal and the human. So worldwide, there are over 300 zoonotic diseases, and obviously more are being discovered all the time with the two examples that I gave. Several are highly significant and considered nationally notifiable. So the country has a list of notifiable diseases, and then each state has a list of notifiable diseases. They do overlap quite a bit. On Ohio's list, over 48% of these are zoonotic, and they declare them to be dangerously contagious and a threat to public health. This is Ohio's list here. You can see it's broken down by class A, B, and C, and I just went ahead and highlighted some of the zoonotic diseases so you can see how many there are. Worldwide, 75%, roughly, they estimate that 75% of emerging and re-emerging diseases are zoonotic. And when you look at all of the human pathogens, 60%, so the majority, are zoonotic, which I think is incredible. The majority of human pathogens come from animals or can come from animals. I talked about smallpox and anthrax earlier. This is our CDC bioterrorism agents list. You can see the category A, B's, and C's. Look at that. Those are all of the ones that are zoonotic. I think that's pretty impressive. Now, since I'm up here talking about One Health, and One Health is often, this idea we have to prevent these diseases from animals from getting to people, there's also another branch of One Health that I just wanted to spend a couple slides on, so I give you the full picture, and that's all the benefits that animals can bring to our lives as well. So there's an area known as human-animal bond, and there's been a lot more research lately on how human-animal bond really enriches people's lives and can be really beneficial for their physical and mental health as well. I'm just going to flip through a few studies so they can decrease pain. Children, they found, can do really well with a companion animal, especially children with autism. Decrease stress, and sometimes you can even have better post-surgical outcomes. And even public health is learning more about this, and they're starting to use dogs to encourage people to exercise more. So obesity is a huge problem in our country, and they're finding that people won't necessarily go out and exercise for their own good, but you can get them to go out and exercise for their animals' good, which I think is pretty interesting. Here's just a list of some of the places that these animals have been found to be beneficial. I won't go through all of them, but it's pretty neat. And then lastly, for the positives of this One Health with our animals is that a lot of the medical advances that occur in veterinary medicine can translate to human medicine and vice versa. So I know I went to Ohio State College of Veterinary Medicine, and they did a lot of cancer research on dogs. And a lot of that research was sent right over to human medicine, and those drugs that were used on the dogs were also tested in people. And I'm pretty sure they found several to be successful. Okay. And with that, I think this is when I switch over to Adam.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the federal, the state, the locals all work together on One Health. But just to get it started off, more of the question and answer for you all. Are you allowed to own a pet fox in Delaware County? What do you guys think? No's, no's, no's. I see somebody shaking their head yes. The answer is actually no.
I said no, but I'm not sure why. It's not an exotic animal which are illegal in Ohio. But you're not supposed to have any wildlife.
Yeah.
Coons and foxes and deers.
Yeah, exactly. So in Delaware, there's rules about wild animals that are natural to Ohio, and the reason that these rules exist is because there's no vaccine that's been proven to be effective in them. So while the vaccine that you give to your dog or your cat is proven to be effective and they're licensed to be used on those animals, there's not one necessarily approved for a fox. And the other thing is, when an animal bites you, it gets put under a quarantine, because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, if your dog bites you, it'll die within 10 days. For a fox, we don't know that exact day limit. The same thing for a coyote or a wolf hybrid. There isn't enough evidence to prove that that 10-day quarantine will hold for those. So that's the reason that you can't own a pet fox in Delaware County. No. So who are all the folks who are involved in One Health, who are involved in animal health, who are involved in human health? You go from an international perspective down to the local perspective. Now, internationally, you have the World Health Organization. Nationally, you come down a little bit lower, and you've got the CDC. Most people have heard of them. You've got the FDA. Statewide, most importantly, there's the Ohio Department of Health. And then when you get to the local level, it's folks like us, the Delaware General Health District, the Franklin County Public Health, Columbus's Public Health. These are the people who are on the ground in your areas day after day. So the World Health Organization, they're in a body, an international body, that looks for trends, and they are going to send out alerts. Most recently, this happened with Zika virus. The World Health Organization labeled Zika virus as a public health emergency of international concern. Now, this triggered a lot of things to happen locally, statewide, nationally, even in Delaware here. After the World Health Organization declared that, we began offering classes on Zika virus. So folks in the public could get to know what this virus was, what they could do to protect themselves, and the actions that we were trying to take as well to prevent the disease. Federal authorities, you've got the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health and Human Services, and we work with these folks sometimes. Just last week, Dr. Elaine and myself and a few others were out at a pet store because there was reports of puppies giving diseases to people. So we were out there and we were collecting little samples and waiting for the dogs to go ahead and do their business. And previously, we had an outbreak with rats. So we were working with the state and the federal partners, and we were looking for rats that were giving folks LCMV. The other thing that the federal agencies cooperate with is a rabies wall, and that is kind of between Ohio and Pennsylvania. What they do is they fly out on helicopters and in airplanes, and they drop little baits to try and get the raccoons to eat this vaccine. And that is designed to try and vaccinate that wild population, so that way we try and prevent the rabies virus from coming from Pennsylvania into Ohio. And for the most part, that's been really effective at keeping our raccoons at a low percentage of rabies positive. Now, the state department that deals the most with this is the Ohio Department of Health. Others include the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And as I was talking about the pet store just last week, the Ohio Department of Health was also there involved in that investigation. So now to talk a little bit about what a local health district is and what we are, just to give you guys an idea. There's two kinds of models of health districts, and one is a decentralized model, and that's where each local entity maintains control, and that's what we are in Ohio. The other is a centralized version, and the slide's wrong. And the centralized version is where the state has the ultimate control. They control the budgets, they control the day-to-day decisions, and they'll have district offices throughout the state. In Ohio, you have a general and a city health district. In Delaware, we're combined. So the city of Powell, the city of Delaware, and the county of Delaware are all combined into one general health district. And our jurisdiction is a little bit weird. We're not necessarily a county agency. We're not necessarily a city agency. You can see those little black areas down there at the bottom of the map. Those areas are where your Polaris is. Those areas are actually annexed into a different jurisdiction, to Columbus or into Franklin County. So your health district here serves around 200,000 people with a staff of 76 and 459 square miles. So talking about what One Health is in the Delaware General Health District, one of the best examples that we're going to go over is how that relates with mosquitoes. And to talk about some of the examples we're going to talk about today, we're going to focus on Aedes trichariatus, and it's known for transmitting La Crosse encephalitis. So La Crosse encephalitis is, for most people, not a very serious disease. It's an incubation period of 5 to 15 days, and the symptoms are fever, headache, nausea, vomiting, and fatigue. So most people who get this disease probably wouldn't think much about it. The problem is, for those who are younger than 16, it can cause serious problems, and those would be seizures, coma, and paralysis. So when we see La Crosse encephalitis, we want to take it seriously because we want to make sure those younger folks are protected. So the mosquito that transmits La Crosse encephalitis, it's known as the tree hole mosquito, because it quite literally looks for areas like a tree hole to breed and to multiply in. It doesn't fly very far, and it doesn't overwinter all that well. So when you're thinking of a mosquito that doesn't fly far and likes to breed in tree holes, what human actions might influence the mosquito? Yes. Yes, deforestation. That could definitely, because you're moving into their territory. The other thing to think about is, what about that pool that you have out back, or your neighbor might have out back? If you stop taking care of that pool, that's just a water body that's now going to become a stagnant area. Those tires that you sometimes see on the side of the road, they can also have an impact, because one of those tires can actually bring thousands of mosquitoes throughout the year. So all of our interactions that we're doing, the ways that we're deforestation, the ways that we're putting our bird baths outside, if we don't clean our gutters, all these actions can actually give these mosquitoes areas to breed and to be closer to you. Now, if you think about a mosquito that has a low flight range, it wouldn't be maybe that big of a deal if they're in the forest and they're in a tree hole. But if they're in your backyard because you have a bird bath or because you have a tire, then it becomes a more serious issue, because these mosquitoes might be close to you. So some of the things that we do to try and prevent mosquitoes, prevent mosquito-borne disease, is we look at some of the areas that might harbor mosquitoes. And these are majority of things that we do as people in the environment. And we do these surveys every year, and you can see that we served 1,800 houses and 1,900 houses. And most of the things on here that are the breeding grounds that we find for mosquitoes are all things that the human interaction does there. Bird baths, children's toys, flower pots, buckets, fire pits. These aren't things that are going to be naturally there. So we're giving the mosquitoes more areas to breed, more areas to multiply, so that way they can be closer to us and potentially transmit those diseases. So what we do with that information is we have to try and educate with that. So some of the educational messages that we come out with is letting folks know how their actions are actually increasing the mosquito population or serving as a breeding ground. So just trying to alert people to look out for those buckets, to look out for those tires, to look out for those gutters. Again, here is a pond that somebody probably wanted at some point in time, but they're not taking care of it anymore. So that pond that once was a nice, aesthetically pleasing environment for the owner is now an area that has a whole bunch of algae growing on it that's just a breeding ground for mosquitoes. So Jason here is actually treating that area to eliminate the ability for the mosquitoes to mature into flying and biting adults. The other thing that we do at the health district is a lot of surveillance. And there's multiple types of surveillance. The prominent one that environmental health does involves testing mosquitoes. Is anybody in here a fisherman or a hunter? I know there's one person. So much like if you're a fisherman, you're probably using different lures to catch different fish. The same is true with mosquitoes. When we're trying to look for West Nile virus, it's transmitted by a different mosquito than when we're trying to look for Zika virus. So we have multiple different traps out there, and I'm going to move away from the mic just so I can point to these traps real quick. So this big bucket right here is actually the trap that we use to capture mosquitoes that transmit West Nile virus. They're known as Pulex mosquitoes, and this device right here has water in it. And what they're going to do is they're going to come and they're going to skim and they're going to lay a raft of eggs in here. So this fan in here takes the mosquitoes and sucks them up into this net where they say it's going to collect them. So this is very specifically designed for that Pulex mosquito that transmits West Nile virus. Now the mosquito that transmits Zika virus, the Aedes albopictus, they're more container breeders. So what we have is something that looks like a little container that they're going to be attracted to. So they're going to come in here and they're going to lay eggs on the edge of this container because they want to lay their eggs there so the water can rise up onto it. So what this trap does is it has a little scent here, and I don't have that because it would make all of us nauseous after a while. But the scent attracts them into the area, and they're going to be trapped by a little fan in here that's going to suck them down into another fan. So it's a very, very different trap and a very different method to test the different mosquitoes. But we want to make sure that we're trying to test for all of them because we don't want to miss what might be going on out there. And this graphic, I doubt you can see in the back. And this was from a couple weeks ago. And at that point in time, we had 3 West Nile positives. We're up to 16 now. Over the last 2 weeks, 16 pools of mosquitoes that have tested positive for West Nile virus. And the other number that we like to track here is the first column that you see red where it has 2 red dots. Those are the guys who actually transmit Zika virus. So at this point in time, there was 2, but now we're up to 7 different locations that we found those in. So we're trying to find, where these diseases are so that way we can react and we can do the things that are necessary to prevent disease transmission in the human population. The other thing that Dr. Elaine's group does is they monitor human disease surveillance. So if someone gets sick and it looks like it might be West Nile virus or it might be Crosse encephalitis or even Zika virus, they're going to follow up with those folks and they're going to find out where their travel history were. Did they travel to a country that might have Zika virus? Did they get the disease in the district here? And then we work very closely together to find out, who we need to talk to, where we need to treat, and just in an effort to minimize any more disease that might be out there. The last thing we do for surveillance is looking for dead birds. Certain birds, blue jays and crows, are sentinels for West Nile virus. So if we find that there's a lot of crows that are dead in a certain area, we can say that there might be West Nile virus in that area. This right here kind of shows the infection rate. And what we do is, this is actually put together by the Ohio Department of Health. And we monitor and see what the infection rate in mosquitoes are. And it kind of gives us an idea on what is going on with the human diseases. So the little blue line here, the one that's kind of in the middle, is where we were just a few weeks ago. It was down at about 5, and now that minimum infection rate is all the way up at about 13, which is pretty close to your second point on the red line there. Now, why this is significant is 2012 is what the red line demonstrates, and that was the most cases that we had seen since the very beginning of West Nile virus. And the fact that we now have a minimum infection rate of mosquitoes that's close to that high point for 2012 is concerning, because 2012 also had 121 cases of human disease. So we know that we want to monitor that and make sure that we respond to that to prevent the mosquito diseases bridging the gap and coming over to humans. So there's a lot of testing that's done on the mosquitoes. They all actually go to the Ohio Department of Health, and they test them for West Nile virus. They ID them. Each mosquito species is listed out, and we know exactly how many of each species there are. And then finally, control. So the way that we take control into consideration is for West Nile virus, for instance. We know that there's a 2 to 4 week gap between when you find West Nile in a mosquito to when the abundance has grown to such a point where a human will get the disease. So if we are doing this surveillance in advance, we can say that West Nile virus is in the mosquito population, and then we use control methods such as fogging in an area to cut down on that population of mosquitoes with disease. And this is all in an effort to prevent the humans from getting that disease. So, yeah.
Okay, another question. Why is it illegal to sell turtles in the United States that are less than 4 inches? Any takers? Any ideas? Okay. I don't have a good picture of this, so I put this on there. But basically, small children could fit a turtle in their mouth that is less than 4 inches, and because turtles carry salmonella and young children are very susceptible, there was a rule that passed that you can no longer sell them if they're less than 4 inches in the United States. Very interesting. Okay, so we talked about some international diseases. We talked about what One Health is, and then we also talked about the systems in place for monitoring these diseases and responding. I'm just going to go through these slides really quickly. We're going to talk about some diseases that may or may not be here in the United States, or that maybe you didn't think were here. Okay, plague, the Black Death, the one that killed 1/3 of the European population. Is it here in the United States, or is it not here in the United States? It's here, yes. Very good, it is here. So it is alive and well in the United States. Fortunately for us, out in the western part of the United States, and our prairie dog friends are back. They carry the plague, and then it's most commonly spread through these fleas. Okay, tuberculosis, here or not here? Widespread. Widespread, yes, it is here. And I'm going to, just because of the focus on our talk, I'm going to talk specifically about zoonotic TB. So the type of tuberculosis that's frequently spread human to human is different than zoonotic TB. And zoonotic TB, for the most part, has been eliminated in the United States thanks to our food safety protocols, getting rid of cattle that were positive. But up in northern Michigan, there's actually a hub of zoonotic tuberculosis, and it's carried by these white-tailed deer. And so different countries have different species that are carrying their zoonotic TB. So this badger in the bottom right, that's who's carrying it in the UK. And so obviously our focal point in the US is northern Michigan, but we can get cases that sporadically pop up because people bring in food products from other countries, a lot of unpasteurized milk products, queso fresco, that's a big one. People will bring them from Mexico and consume them here in the United States. They're not supposed to, but it does happen, and then they can get it that way as well. Rabies. Okay. Yeah, we already talked about this. This is here, absolutely. This is a map of the different types of rabies across the country. What is not shown on here is bat rabies because it's everywhere. So they didn't even bother putting it on this map. Okay, another question. Why are small rodents, rabbits, and pocket pets considered low risk when it comes to rabies? So we talked about raccoons. We talked about raccoons. We talked about our pets, our dogs and cats. Why might not these guys? Why are they lower risk? I'm not seeing any takers, because this is normally what happens to them. They don't normally get a chance to survive their encounter and then develop rabies. I mean, it's kind of a trick question, though. You don't really think about it, but the reality is that's why they're not spreading rabies. They can definitely pick it up, but they usually don't survive long enough. Okay, we already went through this. Smarty over there already said that it is here, and she is correct. Anthrax, it's in the soil, so a lot of soil grazing type animals can pick it up that way and spread it to people. And then we have another interesting fact, a lot of questions here. Okay, the illegal exotic pet trade market here in the United States brings in about $10 billion every year. This is black market money. So about $10 billion worth of animals enters the United States. It's not regulated, obviously. It's in the black market. There's nobody putting these animals through quarantine. I think that's an excellent way for us to get a disease from another country. And this is second only to illegal drug use. So I think that's pretty impressive. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Adam again. Jumping around.
All right, so we show you this slide to set up the next area. We're actually, these are just some of the diseases that we actually do find in the health district. You've got the Lyme disease, Crosse encephalitis, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, Salmonella, Campylobacter, which is what we were looking for last week, Ebola monitoring. We were very heavily doing that a year or so ago. Zika virus monitoring. The communicable disease team looks for that with anybody who's traveling to a country that might have that disease ongoing. But we're just going to give you an idea of what actually happens at the health district when we find a disease. And for this one, we're going to talk about Crosse 2017 one. This one actually happened this year, just a couple months back now. So just to remember about Crosse, this disease is maintained naturally with small mammals and mosquitoes. And this is our Aedes triceriatus that we talked about, who's the tree hole mosquito who doesn't fly very far, but he does like tires, he does like bird baths, he does like those small areas. Incubation, again, is 5 to 15 days, and most people do not experience symptoms, but again, it is very severe sometimes in those who are less than 16. One other important fact about Crosse is it can actually go from a mother mosquito to the eggs. West Nile cannot have that vertical transmission, so that's an important factor in this one. So just going through how fast something like this actually happens in the health district. So at around 9:30 a.m., we were notified that a patient had Crosse encephalitis at a location in the health district. We then activated what's called ICS. It's Incident Command System. It's been around for a long time. The firefighters use it out west to fight the fires. The military uses it. It's a way just where everybody can be on the same language, talking the same terms, and we use it for these kind of activities. So 9:30 we're notified, and by 11 a.m. that day, we're having a meeting and we're talking about what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that nobody else in the area gets this disease? How are we going to make sure that the folks out there have information on what this disease is, what protection that they can take to prevent getting it? And by 4 p.m. that day, we have a pretty good idea of the area that we're looking at. So what you're looking at right here are all the different sectors. So there was about 30 people that were sent out on scene, and this is the planning effort for it. So each one of these colors represents a different strike team that's going to be going door to door, talking to people, looking for areas that mosquitoes might be breeding in, giving out information, giving out repellent, giving out menders that'll fix screens to prevent mosquitoes from flying into your house. So what we're doing here is we're just planning out the entire route within just a few hours of actually getting notification of it. By 8:30 the next morning, we have our 30-plus staff in an operational meeting. So remember, we were notified about this at 9:30 the previous day. So within 23 hours, we have staff ready to go in vehicles to go out to the scene, out in the Ashley area, if you're familiar with Ashley. So by 9:30, the teams arrive on scene. So 24 hours after receiving notification, 30 of our staff members are on scene and going door to door. What they're doing is they're handing out, you can see here the screen menders. They're handing out repellent so that people can protect themselves from mosquitoes. Jason down there at the bottom is throwing larvicide in the pond to prevent mosquitoes from growing in it. And they're also letting them know what our next steps are. So they're letting them know that we're going to be out there and we're going to be fogging for mosquitoes. We're going to be killing off the population that's there. By 12:30 p.m., the canvassing concludes. So within about 27 hours, this entire phase of the action has been completed. And at this point in time, we visited 700 households and approximately 2,100 people through our staff in that 27-hour timeline. By 3:30, we're debriefing all the staff that were out on the scene. And by 8 p.m. the next night, fogging is occurring. Fogging was originally planned for the same night, but with the fogging equipment comes challenges sometimes with the machinery operation, and that's what happened in this case. So to give you the overall idea, and we're just going over this quickly, within 27 hours, the entire population was notified. We were on scene within 24 hours, and the entire event was wrapped up within 72 hours. This cost just under $8,000 to respond to, and this is for one person who came down with this disease. Now, the reason that we act so quickly and have so many folks out there is because we know if a child gets seizures, if a child goes into a coma, it's going to be a lot more costly to that family, to the community, than $8,000. So when you break it down, it's not really that much money that you're spending to prevent these kind of things, to prevent these kind of tragedies that might fall upon a family. All right. Just some different diseases we were going to talk about is influenza A, and just to mention about the fair. It's a great place to go and see the animals. I guess the takeaway that we would have is, all these diseases that an animal might spread, the important thing is just remember to wash your hands. Washing your hands alone is one of the best things that you can do to prevent most of these kind of diseases. Fight the flu, don't forget your flu shot. Yeah.
Sorry, guys, we're running short on time. We don't want to keep you over, so we'll just really briefly go through this. Another thing that we've been working here at the health department is salmonella in our backyard poultry. There's been a big push for people to raise their own food, which is wonderful, but they also need to think about the illnesses that they can bring into their family, and salmonella is definitely one of those with our poultry. So we have been putting some flyers out there for chicks being raised in the classroom, people that are raising chickens in their homes to prevent this. Really, we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up here so we don't hold you guys over. I hope, from this talk that you guys now know what One Health is if you haven't heard about it before, and that you can really appreciate this relationship between human health, animal health, and the environmental health, and how One Health really brings it all together. And in addition to that, hopefully with this talk, you can see how our health here as a county, as a state, as a country can really be impacted by the health from the rest of the world. So it's all interrelated. With that, I'd like to say thank you so much for coming this evening, and we will now open it up to any questions you might have.
Questions? I have a microphone here. Questions. I have one. What is the protocol for quarantine someone? Is there a particular protocol to follow when somebody comes in and with a particular disease? Or?
I would say it depends. Depends on the disease. And I don't, yeah, she can answer.
I can actually speak to that. Depending on the disease, we actually have quarantine and isolation powers in the Ohio Revised Code. So if someone is not cooperating with their treatment or isolating themselves in their home, depending on the disease, we do have the legal authority as the health department to issue public health orders and keep that person in their home. And we can even hire security guards if we need to, so depending on the illness.
Oh, hi. My question was, like, what would you say is, like, your biggest challenge when it comes to, like, preventing the spread of disease and public health?
I think our biggest challenges are probably a little bit different just based on where we work. I think sometimes the educational component can be really difficult. If someone hasn't been personally impacted by a disease, it might be really hard for them to think, wow, I really should wash my hands. If nothing's happened to them yet, they may not feel like that's really important, when really those steps are key to preventing disease. So I think education is super, super important in public health, and I think it's really hard for us to get that message across unless it is a situation where unfortunately somebody is sick and there's a real life example.
I would echo what Dr. Elaine just said. Some of the biggest things that we try to do is not to tell you that you have to quarantine your dog for 10 days. We want to tell you the why. So it's not just because it's in black and white. It's because your dog might have given this disease to someone who it would be 100% fatal. So our biggest challenge is exactly that education, trying to make sure the public knows that we're not just doing this because we want to or because the rule says we have to, that there's actually reasons behind what we do, and trying to get that information out there.
So One Health is this initiative to unify the varying levels of the way that we address public health. So from your time, how has interactions within the Ohio Department of Health changed from your role in?
I've only been there 6 months or 5 months. You probably have a better idea of that.
You can see how it evolves a lot just within our district. There's a lot of interactions because Dr. Elaine and I, we don't work side by side. We don't even work in the same building, but we work very closely when these kind of things happen. So you see a lot of mixing of the different disciplines, of the personal health aspect, of the environmental health aspect, and just the willingness to come together because we're all here to prevent the same disease. We just have different ways that we go about looking at it.
And I'll say, even since vet school, not specific to our health department, but One Health was just kind of starting for some of us. I was told to talk about it in my vet school interview because I was told it would get me in, and I really didn't know much about it other than that. And then since I've been going through my education, it's really become a big deal. I think even in just the past 10 years, it continues to grow.
I have a question, maybe a challenging one. I'm a lover of animals, and I appreciate your pointing out some of the benefits, that animal-human partnerships, especially with domestic animals, dogs, cat, farm animals. We've had a relationship with these animals for many thousands of years. The word that I'm throwing out here is microbiome. I'm perfectly aware that animals carry risks. There's no such thing as a risk-free life. But I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Research has shown that there are actually benefits to being surrounded by, to being exposed to by pathogens. They can help children boost their immune system. They can make us, stronger and less susceptible to diseases out there. So, the trick, I suppose, as always in life, is to find the right balance between the two. But can you say a word or two about the microbiome thing, which is widely discussed these days? It's a movement that even the medical
I mean, I think I can touch on that a little bit. I feel like what we did was, the world kind of panicked about germs and disease, and we kind of did an overhaul and went too far on that. Everything right now is that, you do anything, you got to do a hand sanitizer or a hand wash, and obviously we definitely promote hand washing on this situation, but you can't put yourself in a bubble. We live in a world, we're going to be exposed to different things, and just from the veterinary side, I know commercially raised pigs that are not very much exposed to anything, if they were to go out in the real world, they would get ill really quickly, whereas, a piglet that maybe grew up in someone's backyard, it would be a different scenario. So obviously our immune systems get built because we give it challenges as we go through life, and if you never challenge your immune system, it's never going to build. Is that kind of where you were going with that?
Yeah, I mean, the health department has a certain mindset, and you demonstrated that well tonight. Animals are risky. We need to get our act together. Weaponize, militarize. But I have a more. I can see the other side as well. Animals can be our friends.
Definitely.
Our companions. They enrich our lives. And so even wildlife, should not be subject to eradication and culling. I think that was the other extreme. Again, we need to find the right balance.
Yeah, I think balance is key, and depending on the situation, it might vary a little bit. So, definitely.
Any more questions? I have one. Based upon what you've done so far, what do you think the next epidemic is going to be, and where is it going to come from, if you were to predict?
There's multiple. I think one that a lot of people think about is a pandemic flu. We didn't get to touch on flu that much, but the influenza A is the type of flu that we can get from animals, and it changes rapidly. So it does a thing called genetic drift and shift, and it can actually put together a flu virus from, let's say, a chicken and a pig and a human, and it can combine it into one and have it be new. And if that virus is more successful in transmitting person to person and causing severe illness, that could be a big problem. And right now, it is popping up in China very frequently, and they're worried that if it shifts or drifts enough, that we could have the next flu pandemic. So I would definitely be keeping an eye out for that.
Questions? No? All right, join me in thanking our panel for this evening's presentation. Thank you.